You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show, where we're back for the fall semester. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore, and my other co-host, Dr. Eric Hardiman, will be joining us for our upcoming segments. With all that is currently going on in our country, I'm thrilled about today's guest and topic. I'm here with Samantha Fletcher. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Alyssa.
Whose doctoral dissertation involves qualitative research on social activism. She looks not only at the traits of lifelong activists, but the physical and social barriers they face and overcome. With that, let me introduce Sam more formally. Samantha Fletcher is a doctoral candidate in the School of Social Welfare at the University at Albany. She's a project coordinator, senior research assistant for a statewide program evaluation of peer support services for veterans facing post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms and other challenges in New York State. Her research interests include social activism, social justice, peer support, program evaluation, gerontology, and veterans. Samantha currently co-facilitates a social justice group called The Gathering at the School of Social Welfare. The group is regularly attended by students enrolled in the BSW, MSW, and PhD programs, as well as faculty and staff. So Sam, I'm really excited about your topic today and your discussion. And I know about your research, but I want to jump right into this because we don't have a lot of time. It's a short segment today. But can you briefly tell me and tell our audience about your study?
Yes. So to kind of sum it up as quickly as possible, it's like you said, a qualitative study, and I'm using multiple case study methodology, which essentially means that I have a smaller number of participants, so I have 9, but I do a really in-depth examination of their life. So each person is considered a case. So out of my 9 participants, they're all older adults and they're all lifelong social activists. So they range in age from 70 to 96, and they have been involved in activism from 40 to 72 years, and all of them have worked on multiple causes.
So what are some things that a qualitative study in a doctoral dissertation, that's not always common. Usually people look more at numbers and hard facts. What was it like for you to do this qualitative study?
Well, for me, I tend to think a little bit more qualitatively anyways than quantitatively. So qualitative research is really kind of looking at how or why something happens. So we're really looking at like processes, information that you can't get through numbers. So you can use this information and develop some quantitative studies on it, but it's really trying to figure out. So I actually will tell you my research questions, and that will help explain. So my 2 research questions, the first one's, what are the defining features of activism for older lifelong social activists? So there's really no way to answer that question with quantitative data. You have to talk to people. And then the other question is, how have older lifelong social activists enacted social change? Again, you really have to talk to people to answer those questions. So what we're going to talk about today is focusing on a small part of the defining features of activism for the lifelong social activists.
And you were telling me that you asked your participants about social justice. And why did you incorporate this question in your research?
Okay, so part of multiple case study is that it involves several what we call pieces of evidence. So for me, that was actually, I did a focus group, and then I did multiple individual interviews with the activists, and then also collected things like documents, artifacts. I took pictures of things. So I have a pretty wide database with like 331 pieces of evidence. So when I started this, I got to thinking about once I did the first round of interviews, I was like, I really want to know how these activists define social justice. And in part, that's to tie it back to social work, because as social workers, our profession is grounded in social justice, and we are called to work towards social change. So I thought, what better way to kind of tie the two together than to see how these social activists define social justice. So I actually added the question to the second round of interviews that I did with them.
For social justice, what did you find? Was there a common theme? Is there a common theme for social justice? I mean, my definition might be different than someone else's. What did you find for that?
Right, exactly. And that's one reason why I wanted to ask that question. So for these 9 activists, 8 of them actually defined it very similarly. And that was equal treatment of people, equality of opportunity, and access to basic resources, things like food, medical care, quality education, things like that. So 8 of them defined it that way, and one person defined it differently. He defined it as criminal justice. So when I asked him that, he gave a definition talking about the court system, which was a lot different than the other 8. So then what I was doing with this, looking at social justice, and this actually just came from analyzing the data, what I found was this ideal social order, which was just social justice, really led to how the activists identified social problems and how they critiqued oppressive systems and structures. So in order for me to make that assertion that their definition of social justice drives how they identify social problems and critique social, oppressive systems and structures, I really had to I do this with all my assertions. I really look at how other activists identify social justice, and I happened to be analyzing this right after the Charlottesville incident a couple of weeks ago. And so I was thinking, well, how do those activists, meaning the white supremacists who were out there participating in activists, how do they define social justice? Well, they define social justice that white males are superior and that they should be the ones holding positions of power, being decision makers in our society. So I was like, okay, well, considering that that's their view of social justice, which they've stated publicly that that's their view, then how do they identify social problems? Well, we also know through interviews with white supremacists that they identify diversity and equality as a social problem. And then, so I was like, it actually kind of follows suit with them. And then I also went to pro-life because I grew up in Oklahoma, and I worked in a crisis pregnancy center for 4 years, so I was around a lot of pro-life activists, and I did the same thing, and I was like, yeah, this actually falls suit. And it also hits with the one activist who did not identify social justice like the other 8, he identified social problems differently, and he critiqued systems differently than the other 8.
So you sort of discovered this connection between social justice and lifelong activism, but the definition of social justice is different for everyone. And you're able to understand a little bit more because when we see people out there at being activists on both sides of the fence or whatever they're passionate for, it sort of helps define. How do I even say this? It
explains why they're the position that they're coming from and why they're choosing the actions they're doing is the way I kind of think about it.
Well, we each have our own definition, our viewpoints, and I think sometimes we throw out words like social justice and we have the assumption that everyone is on the same page of what that means. But even if we looked at maybe even the School of Social Welfare or even our fellow colleagues, we might all have varying definitions of what it is that social justice mean, or what some of these words that we use so commonly and think everyone has the same understanding as us or the same belief as us. It can be a little bit different. And that can sort of trigger a different path.
Absolutely. So if you take these 8 activists who identified or defined social justice as equal treatment, equality of opportunity, and access to resources, when we go over to how they identified social problems, there were really 3 levels. And one of them was oppression based on membership group. So racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, religious intolerance, that they viewed that as a social problem. They also viewed geopolitical subversion, which is essentially the United States government and United States corporations subverting foreign governments, essentially to exploit the people in that country. So Latin America is a really good example of that. And also like the apartheid in South Africa. And then also issues that, what I call issues that impact civilization, which was war and the environment. They also identified those as social problems. So my one activist who his definition of social justice was criminal justice, essentially, the only social problem he identified were the ones that impact civilization, war, and environment, whereas every other one identified, most of them, several of the oppression based on a membership group. Like all of them said racism as a problem. Several said sexism. Several said heterosexism. And then when you think about it that way, then the next step they took was really critiquing the systems that perpetuate the oppression. So they all critiqued, except for the one, they all critiqued the government at different levels, federal, state, local levels, and looking at how the government perpetuates these social problems.
So something that a common theme, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, even what I see is relevant today, is when people are out there being activist and, out there protesting or doing whatever it is that they're doing to voice their concern with something. Communication is a really big piece in that, because if people don't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it or sort of the cause behind it, things can fall apart. And that's where a lot of the divisions can come from, not understanding and taking the time to listen to where the other party is coming from, or what are they out there for.
This is another theme in that my defining features of activism. So one of the things I looked at were relationships. So I looked at every relationship that they talked about, like family, other social activists. A lot of them, most of them had relationships with politicians, but then I had one essentially like part of that I called the other side. Like, how did they interact with the other side, people who thought differently from them? So a lot of my activists actually purposely sought out people who thought differently from them and engaged with them. And a common theme across several of them was building bridges. So they were looking at ways that, how can we build bridges? So even if we never get to a place of agreement, how can we work together on other issues, and how can we be civil to each other and be more inclusive than divisive?
I mean, this is really fascinating. And like I said, it's so relevant to what's going on today. So I think I'm looking forward to your book when you publish it. But we have about 1 minute left. And I mean, we're going to be interviewing you a few more times this semester and this academic year. You're going to be giving a few presentations. But is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with as we wrap up?
I think that because the audience is social workers, I think that maybe a first step after this discussion is to really think about what your definition of social justice is, and where'd that come from? How did you develop it? And then really looking at that, and how do you identify social problems, and trying to find those connections. I think that's a really good place to start.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for being with us. Again, you're listening to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show, where we're back for the fall semester. Our guest today was Samantha Fletcher, a doctoral candidate in the School of Social Welfare, where she discussed her qualitative research on lifelong activists and the barriers that they have to overcome. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks, Alyssa.